Hello, my name is Madeline Evely and welcome to my Mathcast. Today our learning objective is to identify and draw points, lines, line segments, rays, and angles, and also to recognize them in various contexts. Our lesson is intended for grade 4. Before we get into our lesson, I want to go over some vocabulary. We need to understand what a line, a ray, a line segment, a point, and an angle is. We're going to begin with line and line segment. Our first vocabulary word, line, is defined as a set of connected points that continues in both directions without end. So here we have our examples, and the arrows tell us that they continue to go on. Our next vocabulary word, line segment, is a set of all points between two endpoints. So here we have our line segment. There is no arrows, which tell us this is just a piece of a line. Next, we're going to be going over rays. A ray is a set of connected points that continues in one direction without end. So unlike a line segment, we do have one endpoint, but the other end goes on forever. Our arrow here indicates that. Finally, we have point and angles. An angle is defined as the shape formed by two rays or line segments that share an endpoint. Angles are measured in degrees. So if we look at our example here, we see some rays joining together to make an angle, and yet again some rays, and again. And then here are some line segments in which they join together to create angles and also a shape. And then a point is just defined as an exact location. So here we have point A on our line M, point B, and here's point A just on a plane. So now that we have gone over our vocabulary, we can start with example 1. Our directions for example 1 tell us to draw a line segment to connect the word to its picture. First, we're going to take a look at this shape we have here. We see that there are no arrows indicating that this will not go on forever on either end, and that would make this a line segment. Moving on, we're going to take a look at this little dot right here, and that will be our point. Moving on, here we see there are two arrows on both ends indicating that this will go on forever on both sides, which would make this be our line. Moving on to the next side, here we have an endpoint with an arrow on the other side, meaning that this is going to go on forever on just one side. That would make this our ray. And finally, we have two rays joining together, and that would create an angle. Now that we have part 1 complete, we're going to look at part 2. This question asks, how is a line different from a line segment? Well, if we take a look above, we see our red line segment here, leading us to this line, shows that our line has two arrows on both ends, indicating that this will go on forever. Meanwhile, a line segment has no arrows, saying that this is just a piece of a line, and it has two certain endpoints. So for our answer, I wrote, a line will extend forever on both directions, and a line segment has two defined endpoints. For example 2, our directions tell us to use the following directions to draw a figure in the box to the right. So here's our box, and here's our directions. Part A is telling us to draw 2 points, A and B. So here I drew our first point and labeled that A, and then over here I drew our second point and labeled that B. Our next direction tells us to use a straight edge to draw A, B. And if you look at the direction on the top, we see an endpoint with a small arrow, which is telling us to draw a ray. So here I am with my straight edge angled in between A and B. So here I had my straight edge, and I drew a line segment between A and B. Now I need to add an arrow onto B to make this a ray. Although I am no artist, we can see that I added an arrow here, and so now we have a ray between point A and B. Part C tells us to draw a new point that is not located on ray AB and label it C. So here's point C, not located on ray AB. Part D tells us to draw line segment AC. We know this is saying line segment because there is no arrows on either side of this. So here we have our line segment AC. It's not perfect as I have a little bit of line here, but it is supposed to end right there. For part E, we are to draw a point not on ray AB or line segment AC and call it D. So here is point D, And now for part F, we are to construct a line, CD. We know this is a line because of the 2 arrows on the top here. Here is line CD. I extended this to show that our line extends. And our last instruction is to use the points we've already labeled to name one angle. I'm going to name our angle right here, which would be angle CAB, as it is made up with the line segments from C and A and B. Here's our final product. We have this marking here that indicates an angle, and here is it labeled up above. Finally, for example 3, we have an outline that is similar to example 2. Our directions here say, use the following directions to draw a figure in a box to the right. So here's our box, and here are directions. Part A tells us to draw 2 points and label them X and Y. So here are points W and X. Part B tells us to use a straight edge to draw a line segment, WX. Here's our line segment, W and X. Part C tells us to draw a new point that is not on line segment WX and to label it Y. So here is our point Y. So here is our ray, WY. We see that W is our endpoint and Y has an arrow indicating that it will go on forever. Part E tells us to draw a new point that is not on WY or on the line WX and label that Z. So here's our point Z, and our next instruction tells us to construct line WZ. Here we have our line WZ with 2 arrows indicating that it will extend on forever on both ends. Now this tells us to identify angle ZWX by drawing an arc to indicate the position of the angle. So here's our angle ZWX, and I'm going to draw an arc right here to indicate the position of the angle. Lastly, we are to identify another angle by referencing points that we have already drawn. We do have one more angle here, and that would be angle YWX, and so I'm going to draw an angle arc right here to indicate that we were talking about this specific angle. And here I labeled this angle YWX. YWX. And that was my Mathcast. Thank you for watching. Other resources include EngageNewYork.com and Math Vocab Words. This was, again, created by Madeline Evely.